I spent a few years working on Native American or American Indian reservations, mostly in the Southwest, in fact, in California, near San Diego. And I was interested in one particular family of languages, 3 languages that were very similar to each other, the way that Spanish, Italian, and French are similar, with one being a little bit more divergent, a little more separate from the other. And I got into Cupeño because I was asked to help teach Cupeño to the children who were losing the language. In fact, the language was disappearing very fast. And I had to study the language with an old lady during the afternoon and then teach it to classes afterwards. And it was a new language for me, a different kind of language. The first time I studied American Indian languages, the first language I had was a language in which I remember the word for house was wa. And I learned the endings for nouns and for verbs, and I remember the ending for the future ended in ch, like I will do something. And if you wanted to say I may do something in the future, you could add a chl to it. So I was driving along and I saw a hill, an attractive hill on the side, and I pointed. I was driving along with my Native American consultant, and I said, "Oh, what's that up there? It's a beautiful hill." And he said, "Wapash." And I said, "What?" Because wa meant house, and it had a subjunctive, a might, and a future ending. And I found out that it meant something like, there might be a house going up there. But you could apply the endings to the actual noun, which was very convenient. Instead of having to tag along things, there is going to be a house, perhaps, standing up there, to get that same idea. It was very, very quick. Okay, now, Cupeño is one of 3 languages, as I told you, and they've been in Southern California for about, some people say, 3,700 years. And probably their language is part of a family of languages, a big family of languages, known as Uto-Aztecan. You might notice from the name that there is Uto, the Utes, Paiutes, Utah, and as Aztec, the language spoken in, now called Nahuatl, spoken in Mexico and in some other areas down there. And the language is related to languages like Hopi, which is also part of the Uto-Aztecan family. And it's assumed that at some point, all of those tribes, a lot of those tribes moved north. They migrated across from Mesoamerica. They settled around Arizona and New Mexico. And the Hopi set up little villages, which are still there. And then a group of them crossed over the mountains and into California. Presumably the population had grown and settled. And the interesting thing about the Cupeños, as distinct from the other 2, was that they settled in little villages like the Hopi. And they had 3 settlements there. There was Cupa, a little place called Huilacalpa, and Palocla. And I remember my language consultant, the old lady, was telling me, she was the last speaker of the language, was telling me that they used to have different speech habits, they were almost like different dialects of Cupeño. The Cupeños had, everyone was either an isliam, a coyote, or a tuktam, a wildcat. They divided into 2 clans. And part of the reason was they're a small group and they didn't want a lot of intermarriage. So this was a way of varying. And of course there was a fair amount of intermarriage with the speakers of the related languages, the Cahuillas and the Luiseños. Okay, they had a home in a place called, well, a place that's now called Warner's Hot Springs. It was called Cupa at that time, hence Cupeño, which is, in the language, means something like a sleeping or resting place. And they had a village with adobe houses in the 19th century and quite a strong community. They had elaborate ceremonies. They had shamans called pul, and they knew all the local medicines, the berries to take for certain illnesses, and they were thought to have the power to turn, they could turn into bears. And the old lady that I was working with swore that she'd seen that happen. So I think also probably they drank some potions that probably helped them see some of these things. But they were very successful farmers, and they were described as pretty well off because they lived in this area which had hot springs, and you could relax there, and Indians came from other areas in order to take a break. So they were doing pretty well economically, and they had a pasture where the cows and sheep, and they grew crops. They were quite prosperous. Mexico came, took over the place, and more or less left them alone. Gave ownership to a man named Juan Jose Warner, and he had title to the land, but he didn't bother the Cupeño. They stayed in their ancient homes. But then disaster happened. 1880, the United States took over, and the United States required that everyone who had owned land must register in Sacramento, the state capital, by a certain date. Well, apparently no one told the Cupeños that. And instead, a politician, the son of a former governor of California, registered his ownership. And later, he moved to have the Indians expelled from their land to quote, trespassers and interlopers. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said they were trespassing and they had to leave. And they were told they would be given beautiful homes somewhere else, a nice place, and free water. And they were forced to load everything into a cart and to give up their homes and to leave. And the woman I worked with was only 9 years old when it happened, and she remembers it very vividly, running barefoot behind the carts with all their bedding and pads. Okay, now the language itself, if you go to the reservation now, where they are, you'll hear them, they may be doing a program for you, the children or the adults, and they sing, "We are the people, we are the people of Cupa, women and men, children and old people." And they have dances, traditional dances, in which they carry out these old ceremonies. And there's one of hopping birds, where the birds hop, kusanem chi, kusanem uyo uyao, kusanem takwalekwa, and they hop to and fro as they're doing it. And the language in that is a little different from what I'd studied. And Rosinda, the old lady, told me that that was the old language that the really old people spoke, the great-grandfather. Okay, now the language itself, if you look at the page with the phonetics on it, I think it's the second page in your handout, you'll see that It describes the sounds P, T, Ch, K. They're all voiceless. Your vocal cords don't vibrate. Whereas if you say B, G, H, then your vocal cords are operating. They don't have voiced consonants, voiced stops in the language. So they have a P, but they don't have a B. They have a T, but they don't have a D. And G, and they have a K, but not a G. Now, you will come across a few words that have D and G in it, voice sounds. And if you come across them, you know that they are borrowings from Spanish, because the Spanish came and took over the area, the Mexicans, and so there was a good deal of language contact. Now, looking at the other sounds, they have ny, and ng, and sounds like y and w, the regular sounds that you might expect. A simple vowel system, y, u. There was no e in the language. So anytime you hear and something that's written with an e, it's pronounced So the word for no is, the word for yes, I'm sorry, is her. And the word for me, N-E, is n, or n. Now, one other property of the language is that it has short vowels and long vowels that make a difference. Now, the language, the word for I is n, as I said. It's on your handout. It looks like ne. That little thing that there's a question mark is actually the sound, the glottal catch, the glottal stop. N, and as I, and chimum is we, and is you, and is plural you, and so on. Now, going further down, you see tense, aspect, and mood. And one of the things that you have, the distinction you have, is not so much with simple past as with whether it's happened, realis, and whether it's not happened, irrealis. So, and it's close enough to future, irrealis, that it's pretty much the same, pretty much. But the past, the is only refers to things that have actually happened, and they just leave it out. And that attaches to the subject. So n is I, and in the past I saw, n I saw, that I passed, nto I saw, I passed, I saw is the way you say I saw it. Now, in English we have prepositions, prepositions. We go to the house. In Cupeño, they go house to, house from. Just like Japanese. House from, you have the noun in Japanese followed by kara. In Cupeño, it's ngach. So Cupa is the name of the place. Cupa ngach is from Cupa. Cupa nga is at or in Cupa. Cupaika, but ika on the end, is going to Cupa. And this matches languages which have prepositions, typically have the word order subject, verb, and if it's an object, an object. Languages which have postpositions, where the twos and the fours follow the nouns, typically have subject, object, and verb. So if you have to learn Japanese, you will have to get that habit of saying the verb at the end. Now, objects. In English, you can tell an object by where it's positioned in the sentence. In Cupeño, you tell it because it has an ending, E. So you can say Kal, the house, Kali, at the house, and Kali, I'm sorry, it's not at the house, it's the object. And the plural marker is So you can have Kimal is a boy, Kimalum are boys, and that's one of the forms. They also have irregular forms, like English has man, don't say mans. They have another plural for boy, boys, Kimal, boys, Kikitam. There is the ending on the end, which is the equivalent of English plural S. The word for girl is nawishmal. So I see a girl is, I saw a girl is nu'up, I in the past. Nuto, I saw. But in between that, I have to put nawishmali. Nu'up, nawishmali, nuto. I, a girl, saw. So you can tell, what do you think nawishmalami means? It's got an ending and an E ending. The ending means it's plural. The E means it's object, so it's a plural object. I saw the girls. Now, one other interesting part about the language, which is not unlike Turkish or Japanese, for example, is that it's agglutinative. Gluten, you know what gluten is? It's stuff that sticks things together, glue. And the languages where you can make long verbs by adding little endings to them. So, buy something, you say samsa is buy. I want to buy something, you have samsavichu, one word. I was wanting to do it, samsavichukal. So we can add, and in fact we can say samsa leo vichakal, which means I want to go buying something. I want to go around buying something. So you can have quite long, complicated verbs because they contain the major part of the meaning. So looking at your handout on I'm going to go over there for you to make him want to make her drink this, which is a ridiculous sentence. But I was just trying, when I was working on the research, trying to get her to stretch the language as much as they could, and I would construct other sentences and using that, and she would understand them. So we've got beginning EV, and here you've got EV is this or here, and it's got an E on the end, spelled with a Y. That's the object ending, so it's the object, and then it has N, which is a subject. You have to have the N attached to the first word in the sentence, whatever it is. So, and then we've got I patnin vichuni. Pa is, E is the object pronoun, it, attached to the verb. Pa is the verb, drink. Nin is to make someone drink. And vichu is want to make someone drink. And ni is a causative, to make someone want to make someone drink. It's very complicated. And then I've got leo, which is to go around. And then I've got ni, which is to make someone go around doing it. And you've got mach, which is also part of it, which is I'm doing it on behalf of someone else, the benefactor. It says ben there. Now I said that the word order, the predominant word order, was subject, object, verb, SOV. But they do change the order depending on particular social contexts, what we call pragmatically driven ones. So you can get a verb at the beginning, like Latin, you can have a verb at the beginning or you can have a verb at the end. The standard position is at the end. Pretty much the same in Cupeño. And you can, with a number of verbs, you can put this subject in the middle of the verb and break up the verb. So that it's a very different language in many ways from ones that you're normally used to, the European languages and language like Chinese. One of the things in English we have a lot of subordinate clauses. I know that he is coming. They would say something like, I know he's coming. Which is sort of like the fact, I know the fact of his coming, which does about the same thing. And just looking at the language itself, let's look at the text. Cupeño expulsion story. This is a story about what happened to them in the 19th century. Chimish Cupangach witchem. We are Chimish Cupangach from Cupa, which the people from Cupa. We are the people from Cupa. Chimkib Acheson-Clair. Our homes beautiful they were, and our lands broad they were also. Chimki, Chimpawai, our homes, our water, our lands, much of our livestock, Chimtawash, we lost them. Zelsa Apapas, she said, she was the speaker for the Indians trying to protect them. I Piyama Kiktam Chetmiachwan, we have always lived here. Sha'up Ahwashmi Mitoka, do you see those over there? Atachmi Yavyachhodimi, people, Indians buried there. Ahwachim El Chimnan, they are our fathers. And the poem describes their religious beliefs, isn't he? Our Lord, he made 2 mountains, and to us he gave this land. And one of the mountains was an eagle's nest. It was an eagle's nest, and another was supposed to be a giant rabbit. And the shamans, the priests of the time, would go up there to meditate and to conduct ceremonies at special times of the year. And they said, our fathers died here, we can't leave them. Even if you could give us the best land in the world, it's not good for us. Not like Kumu Ivi Kupai, like this Cupa. Notice the word Kumu, it's Spanish, they borrowed it. Como. There's no other place for us. Our home is here. But the government men, they threw our things into the carts, our clothes, our chairs, our cups, our dishes, and they drove us out and piled everything onto the carts, our our livestock, our grinding stones, our beautiful homes, those we had to leave behind. They said, the government men said, beautiful houses they would give us. And they said our water would be free forever. And the poem describes how they carried on the journey. And she remembers her great-grandmother ran away, going up the mountain. She said she wanted to die. Minchimpa isyam nikwa, even if the coyotes eat me, she said. And eventually, they found her and they brought her down, and she died shortly after. And then the people went on. They arrived in Pala, where their reservation is now, and the Ahwanga Kaihish Chumki, they had no houses for us. Jimpum Tatishnin, they had tricked us. And in fact, they had to live in tents, little tents that were set up. and they were mixed with other Indians speaking totally different languages, so that the only language they had in common was English, and that was deliberate, so they would lose their language. They've since trying to recover the language. They've lost their last speaker, but they sing the carols in their language, and they do their dances, and I've had the job of translating the Lord's Prayer and a number of the carols. So they are trying to keep going, to have a sense of themselves as their identity as people, special people. And I was just trying to Chum shuni cha chana pami au tamal panamakin. You recognize that? Joy to the world. And it's wonderful to hear them at Christmas time. So the story of the way the United States treated the Native Americans is not a nice story. But the people still have spirit, and they keep going, and they're trying to restore their language as much as they can. But they're poor people, and they have to work very hard.